The concrete was already crying when Frank first pressed his calloused palm against the levee wall. Hairline tears seeping water where there should be none. Whispering warnings only 32 years of experience could hear. Behind him, young engineers stared at screens, their algorithms promising safety while the structure beneath their feet prepared to surrender. 3,000 lives rested on the other side of this failing wall. At 58, he learned that systems rarely fail without warning machines. Levees, even companies. They speak their distress in subtle languages a bearings whisper, a concrete wall's weeping, the quiet dismissal of a safety warning. He'd already lost one battle this month, walking away from a factory with nothing but a cardboard box and a termination notice. All for doing the right thing. But this time would be different. This time, lives hung in the balance. The water was rising, the storm was coming, and the wall was already crying. The rhythmic hum of machinery had been Frank Reynolds' lullaby for 32 years. At 58, he could diagnose most mechanical problems by sound alone, the way a seasoned doctor could identify an illness from a cough. His calloused hands moved with practiced precision across the industrial turbine, feeling for vibrations that shouldn't be there. "Reynolds, they need you in Section C," called Donovan, the floor supervisor, his voice barely audible over the symphony of the factory floor. "The new cooling system's acting up again," Frank nodded, wiping grease from his hands onto his already stained coveralls. Eastwood Manufacturing ran 24 hours a day, churning out industrial components for everything from commercial aircraft to municipal water systems. As senior maintenance specialist, Frank was the last line of defense against costly shutdowns. Section C housed the newest equipment, computerized, sensor-laden machines that Frank approached with a mixture of respect and wariness. Young technicians swarmed around a massive cooling unit, their faces illuminated by tablet screens displaying diagnostic data. "What's the story, Marcus?" Frank asked the lead technician, a kid barely older than his daughter. Marcus looked up, relief washing over his face. "Temperature fluctuations in quadrants 3 and 4. The software says everything's fine, but the northeast corner's running 15 degrees hotter than specs allow." Frank suppressed a smile. These kids trusted their computers more than their instincts. "Let me take a look." He knelt beside the unit, pressing his palm against various points on the housing, closing his eyes to better feel the subtle rhythms of the machine. The younger technicians exchanged glances. This old-school approach seemed almost mystical to them. "There's your problem," Frank said after a few minutes. "Microfracture in the secondary cooling loop. Software can't detect it because it's maintaining pressure. But you've got coolant micro-leaking into the insulation layer." Marcus frowned. The diagnostics would have caught that. "Not if it's below the sensor threshold," Frank replied, not unkindly. He'd seen this before. The new systems were precise, but sometimes missed what experienced hands could feel. "Manual override the quadrant shutdown, replace this section of piping, and rebalance the flow. Should be back to normal in about 3 hours." As the younger technicians got to work, Frank made detailed notes in the maintenance log. He believed in documenting everything, a habit that had saved the company millions over the years, though few in management acknowledged it. His shift was scheduled to end at 4:00 p.m., but it was nearly 5:30 by the time he headed toward the locker room. Another day, another hour and a half of overtime that would help with Amy's tuition payment. His daughter was in her final year of engineering at State University, working 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a near-perfect GPA. Pride swelled in his chest whenever he thought about her determination. Frank's phone vibrated as he changed out of his work clothes. A text from Amy. "Dad, made dinner. Should be warm in the oven. Don't work too late." He smiled, typing back, "On my way now. Save room for ice cream." It had become their Friday tradition discount ice cream from Barton's Creamery, the only luxury they regularly allowed themselves since Linda passed 5 years ago. Cancer had taken his wife after an 8-year battle, leaving medical bills that had nearly bankrupted them despite decent insurance. The second mortgage on their modest 3-bedroom home was a constant reminder of those difficult years. As Frank walked through the sprawling facility toward the employee parking lot, he paused at the newly installed boiler system. Something caught his attention, a subtle sound beneath the normal operational noise, a faint whistle that didn't belong. He frowned, kneeling to inspect the pressure gauge. The reading was within normal parameters. But, everything okay? Frank asked Harriet Jones, the night shift supervisor, approaching with her clipboard. Not sure, he admitted. Listen, you hear that? Harriet cocked her head. I don't hear anything unusual. That's just it. There should be a regular purge cycle every 40 minutes. It's overdue. Frank checked his watch. And there's a high-pitched whistle that shouldn't be there. The system was just inspected last week, Harriet said. Passed all certifications. Frank shook his head. Something's not right. We should power down for a full diagnostic. Harriet sighed. You know I can't authorize that without Benson's approval. We've got production quotas to meet. Then call Benson, Frank insisted. That new system is handling 3 times the pressure of the old one. If there's a problem, I'll note your concerns in the shift report. Harriet cut him off, her tone making it clear the discussion was over. Enjoy your weekend. Frank? He hesitated. 32 years of experience screaming at him not to walk away. But he'd fought this battle before management prioritizing production over caution and knew how it would end. With a resigned nod, he continued toward the exit, making a mental note to follow up on Monday. The evening air hit him with unexpected warmth for October in Massachusetts. Indian summer, his father would have called it. Frank paused at his 15-year-old Ford pickup, gazing back at the factory's sprawling silhouette against the setting sun. Smokestacks stretched skyward, drawing dark lines against the orange-pink horizon, a sight both beautiful and ominous. He was halfway to his truck when the explosion ripped through the evening calm. The force of it knocked Frank off his feet, hot air washing over him as the sound reverberated across the parking lot. He rolled to his knees, disoriented, ears ringing. Through the high windows of Section B, the boiler room orange flames flickered, followed by thick black smoke. Training took over. Frank sprinted back toward the building, pulling out his phone to dial 911 as he ran. Explosion at Eastwood Manufacturing, he reported, giving the address and approximate location within the facility. Unknown number of workers inside. Fire in the boiler section. The nearest entrance was locked emergency protocols automatically sealing sections of the building. Frank used his master key card, silently thanking the company for at least one safety measure they hadn't skimped on. Inside, the fire alarm blared, emergency lights casting harsh red shadows across the empty corridors. Hello, he called out, moving cautiously toward Section B. Anyone here call out? The smoke grew thicker as he approached the boiler room, forcing him to crouch low. Heat radiated through the industrial doors, which had automatically closed but not fully sealed another safety feature responding to the emergency. Frank pressed his hand against the door, feeling for temperature. It was hot but not searing. Taking a deep breath, he pulled his shirt over his nose and mouth, then carefully pushed the door open just enough to look inside. The scene was chaos. The new boiler system had ruptured, steam and flames jetting from multiple breach points. Most workers had evacuated, but Frank spotted 3 figures on the far side of the room, partially obscured by smoke. 2 younger men were struggling with something. No, someone, a third person pinned under fallen debris. Hey, Frank shouted. Over here! One of the men looked up. Marcus, the young technician from earlier. Frank Johnson's trapped. We can't lift it. Frank assessed the situation quickly. The main fire was contained to the ruptured boiler, but secondary fires were spreading. The sprinkler system was working in sections, but damage to the pipes meant reduced water pressure. They had minutes, at most. Keep low, Frank commanded, making his way across the room, navigating between machinery and fallen metal. The heat was intense, sweat immediately soaking through his civilian clothes. When he reached them, he saw the problem. A section of overhead ventilation duct had collapsed, pinning Randy Johnson's leg to the floor. The young maintenance worker was conscious but clearly in pain. The whole thing's about to go critical, Marcus shouted over the alarms. Pressure's building in the secondary chambers. Frank made a split-second decision. Both of you, get out now. I'll free him. But, now that's an order. Frank used his best Navy voice, left over from his service days. I need you to clear the path and hold the doors. The young men hesitated only briefly before nodding. As they moved toward the exit, Frank turned to Randy. This is gonna hurt, he warned, examining the fallen ductwork. But it'll hurt a lot less than staying here. Ready? Randy nodded, face pale beneath the soot and sweat. Frank positioned himself at the heaviest section of metal, bracing his feet against a structural beam for leverage. With a grunt of effort, he lifted, muscles screaming in protest. The duct shifted just enough for Randy to drag himself free, leaving a smear of blood on the concrete floor. Can you walk? Frank asked, letting the heavy metal crash back down. Think my ankle's broken, Randy gasped. Put your arm around me. Frank helped him up, supporting his weight as they started toward the exit where Marcus waited. They were halfway there when Frank heard a soft moan from behind the damaged boiler. He froze. Someone else is in here, he said. We gotta go, man, Randy urged, coughing violently. This place is gonna blow. Frank made another split-second decision. Marcus, get Randy out. There's someone else. Before they could protest, Frank helped transfer Randy's weight to Marcus, then turned back toward the sound, ducking low under the thickening smoke. Around the massive boiler unit, partially hidden by fallen insulation panels, lay a woman in business attire completely out of place in the industrial setting. She was semi-conscious, a gash on her forehead bleeding freely. Her fashionable pantsuit was torn and dirty, one leg bent at an unnatural angle. Frank recognized her vaguely, someone from corporate who'd been touring the facility earlier. Ma'am, he said, gently touching her shoulder. Can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises so dark they appeared black in the emergency lighting. My leg, she whispered. I can't move. I'm going to carry you, Frank explained, already assessing the best way to lift her without causing further injury. It's going to hurt, but we need to move now. A loud crack from the boiler emphasized his point. The pressure was building toward a secondary explosion. Without waiting for her response, Frank carefully slid his arms under her knees and shoulders, lifting her with a strength that belied his 58 years. She cried out in pain but locked her arms around his neck as he straightened. The smoke was now so thick that Frank could barely see 3 feet ahead. He oriented himself by memory, moving carefully through the obstacle course of damaged equipment. Stay with me, he urged when he felt her grip loosening. What's your name? Eleanor, she managed between pained breaths. Eleanor Hayes. Well, Eleanor, I'm Frank Reynolds. Been maintaining these machines for 32 years, so I know every exit in this place. We're gonna be fine. He wasn't sure if he believed that himself, especially when another ominous crack echoed through the room, followed by a gush of superheated steam that narrowly missed them. The exit seemed impossibly far away. Frank's lungs burned, each breath more difficult than the last. His back screamed in protest at carrying the woman's weight, old injuries from his Navy days flaring to life. But he kept moving, one step at a time, using the wall as a guide when visibility dropped to almost nothing. Almost there, he encouraged, though he wasn't entirely sure. The layout was familiar, but the smoke and destruction had transformed it into an alien landscape. Then, like a miracle, a beam of light cut through the darkness, a firefighter's flashlight. Voices called out, muffled by masks in the roaring fire. Here, Frank shouted, his voice hoarse from smoke. We're here. 2 firefighters in full gear emerged from the smoke, quickly moving to assist. One took Eleanor from Frank's arms, while the other supported him toward the exit. They were barely 20 feet from the door when the secondary explosion hit. The force threw them forward, a wave of searing heat washing over them. Frank felt himself falling, then strong hands dragging him the rest of the way out of the building. Cool night air hit his face as they emerged into the parking lot, now filled with emergency vehicles, their lights painting everything in surreal flashes of red and blue. Paramedics swarmed around them immediately. Frank tried to stand but found his legs wouldn't cooperate. The world tilted sideways as exhaustion and smoke inhalation caught up with him all at once. "Eleanor," he managed to say, looking for the woman he'd rescued. "They're taking care of her," a paramedic assured him, placing an oxygen mask over his face. "You've inhaled a lot of smoke, sir. We need to get you to the hospital." Frank wanted to protest he had ice cream plans with Amy, but darkness was creeping in at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw before consciousness slipped away was Benson, the plant manager, staring at him with an unreadable expression. The hospital ceiling came into focus slowly, its institutional white tiles becoming the first thing Frank registered. The second was the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. The third was his daughter's voice. "I swear, Dad, if you ever scare me like that again." Frank turned his head to find Amy sitting beside his bed, her dark hair so like her mother's pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, though she was trying for a smile now. "Ice cream," he croaked, his throat raw from smoke. Amy let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "You nearly die in an explosion, and that's your first concern?" "It was your favorite," Frank managed, attempting to sit up. Pain lanced through his chest, and he winced. "Easy," Amy cautioned, adjusting his bed to a slight incline. "3 cracked ribs, moderate smoke inhalation, and a first-degree burn on your right arm. The doctor says you're lucky it wasn't worse." Frank's memories of the explosion returned in fragments, the heat, the smoke. Randy trapped under debris, the woman with dark eyes. "The others?" he asked. "How are they?" "Randy Johnson has a broken ankle and some cuts, but he'll be fine. Marcus wasn't hurt." Amy's expression softened. "They told me what you did. Dad, running back into a burning building. At your age, what was I supposed to do? Leave them." Frank's voice was stronger now, indignation giving it power. "No," Amy sighed. "That wouldn't be you, would it?" She reached for a water cup, helping him take a sip through the straw. "The woman you rescued, she's in surgery. Broken femur and some internal bleeding, but they think she'll recover." Frank nodded, relieved. "What about the plant? How bad is the damage?" "Section B is a total loss. They're saying it'll be closed for at least 2 months for repairs and investigation." Amy hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Mr. Benson was here earlier." The plant manager's strange expression returned to Frank's memory. What did he want? Amy's jaw tightened, the same expression she'd worn as a stubborn 5-year-old refusing to eat Brussels sprouts. "He brought paperwork, incident reports for you to sign." "Standard procedure." Frank nodded. "Did you tell him I'd do it once I'm discharged?" "That's just it. Dad, the incident report included language about you violating evacuation protocols. They're trying to pin this on you somehow." Frank struggled to make sense of this. "That's ridiculous. The explosion happened because they ignored my warning about the boiler system." "I know," Amy said, squeezing his hand. "Marcus told me you'd flagged it earlier, but Benson's report doesn't mention that. It makes it sound like you were negligent." Before Frank could respond, a nurse entered to check his vitals. By the time she left, exhaustion was pulling at him again, the combination of pain medication and physical exertion making it hard to keep his eyes open. "Get some rest," Amy said, noticing his struggle. "I'll be right here." "You have class," Frank protested weakly. "It's Saturday, Dad," she reminded him with a gentle smile. "Besides, Dr. Lou owed me a favor. I fixed her laptop last month. She's emailing me the lecture notes." As Frank drifted back to sleep, he wondered vaguely how his sensible, responsible daughter had grown up so fast. In his mind's eye, he could still see 5-year-old Amy in overalls, solemnly handing him tools while he fixed the dishwasher, asking why after every explanation. The next time Frank woke, sunlight was streaming through the hospital window, and Amy was gone. In her place sat Benson, his expensive suit looking out of place against the institutional furniture. "Reynolds," the plant manager acknowledged, closing the folder he'd been reviewing. "How are you feeling?" "Like I was in an explosion," Frank replied dryly, instantly on guard. "Where's my daughter?" "Cafeteria. I told her we needed to discuss some business matters." Benson leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "I'll be direct. The situation at the plant is complicated." "Seems simple to me," Frank countered. "I warned about a problem with the new boiler system. It was ignored. The system failed catastrophically." Benson's expression hardened. "That's your version. Our inspection records show the system passed all required safety checks last Tuesday." "Paperwork doesn't mean much when there's a design flaw," Frank argued. "I heard the problem yesterday. The whistle, the missed purge cycle, classic signs of pressure buildup, and yet you left the building instead of taking immediate action." Frank stared at him in disbelief. "I reported it to Harriet Jones. She said she needed your authorization to shut down for diagnostics." "Ms. Jones has no recollection of such a conversation," Benson said smoothly. "What we do have is security footage of you exiting the building approximately 12 minutes before the explosion, then returning afterward in violation of emergency protocols." The realization hit Frank like a physical blow. They were setting him up to take the fall. 32 years of service, and they were going to make him the scapegoat for their corner cutting. "You know that's not what happened," Frank said quietly. "What I know," Benson replied, placing a document on the bedside table, "is that we have 3 injured employees, millions in damaged equipment, and production delays that will cost us contracts. Someone has to be accountable. And that someone is the guy who warned you about the problem and then saved 3 lives." Benson had the decency to look uncomfortable. "The board feels your actions, while heroic, demonstrated poor judgment. Running back into a burning building instead of waiting for emergency services put more lives at risk." "Those people would have died waiting," Frank stated flatly. "Perhaps." Benson stood, straightening his jacket. "The company is prepared to offer a generous severance package, 6 months of salary, continuation of health benefits for 90 days, and a neutral reference for future employment. In exchange, we ask that you sign this statement acknowledging your role in the incident and agreeing not to pursue legal action." Frank didn't touch the document. "And if I refuse, then we proceed with termination for cause, which would affect your pension vesting and any future unemployment claims." Benson's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing a minor scheduling issue. "I should mention that the investigation will include a review of all maintenance logs under your supervision for the past 5 years. The threat was clear they would find or fabricate other instances of negligence if he didn't cooperate." Frank thought of Amy, of her tuition payments and the second mortgage, of the medical bills still arriving from Linda's final treatments. "I need time to think about it," he said finally. "Of course." Benson placed a business card on top of the document. "You have until Monday. Call my office when you've made your decision." As Benson left, Amy returned, 2 coffee cups in hand. She took one look at Frank's face and set the cups down. "What did he want?" Frank explained the situation as calmly as he could, watching his daughter's expression transform from confusion to outrage. "That's blackmail," she exclaimed when he finished. "They can't do this. We should sue them." "With what money?" Frank asked gently. "Besides, they've already started building their paper trail. It would be my word against theirs." Amy paced the small hospital room, the same determined stride Linda had used when problem-solving. "There has to be another way. What about the others, Marcus and Randy? They know what really happened. They're young, with careers ahead of them." Frank sighed. "I can't ask them to risk their jobs." "So you're just going to let them fire you after 32 years? Amy's voice cracked with emotion. "Dad, this isn't right." Frank reached for her hand, stilling her pacing. "Life rarely is, sweetheart. We'll figure something out." The doctor discharged Frank that afternoon with prescriptions for pain medication and strict instructions to rest. Amy drove him home in her beat-up Honda Civic, the silence between them heavy with unspoken worry. Their modest two-story colonial looked exactly as it had for the past 20 years, white with blue shutters, slightly overgrown lawn. Linda's garden now maintained by Amy with varying degrees of success. Inside, everything was clean, but worn furniture that had seen better days. Carpets thinning in high-traffic areas. The kitchen remodel they'd planned before Linda's diagnosis, still just a set of magazine clippings in a folder. Frank eased himself onto the living room sofa, while Amy busied herself making tea. On the mantel, Linda smiled from a dozen photographs their wedding day. Amy's birth, family vacations, her last Christmas, 5 years gone. But her absence still felt like a physical presence in the house. "I called the widowers' support group," Amy said, returning with 2 steaming mugs. "Mr. Daniel said they can meet on Wednesday instead of Monday if you're not feeling up to it." Frank accepted the tea gratefully. The support group had been Amy's idea after his first anniversary without Linda, when she'd found him sitting in the dark garage at 3 a.m., staring at Linda's gardening tools. He'd resisted initially, but the monthly meetings with other men who understood the particular loneliness of losing a spouse had become an unexpected lifeline. "I'll be fine by Monday," he assured her. "How's your project coming along?" The water filtration design. It was a transparent attempt to change the subject, but Amy allowed it, launching into an explanation of her senior engineering project, a low-cost water purification system designed for deployment in disaster areas. Frank listened attentively, pride momentarily displacing his worries. His daughter had inherited Linda's brilliant mind and compassionate heart, along with his own practical problem-solving skills. The weekend passed quietly. Frank rested as ordered, though the forced inactivity made him restless. By Sunday evening, he'd made up his mind to accept Eastwood's severance offer. He couldn't fight the company without endangering Amy's future. And at 58, with specialized skills in an industry increasingly dominated by computerized systems, his prospects for comparable employment were slim. Monday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching Frank's mood as he reached for the phone to call Benson. Before he could dial, there was a knock at the front door. "I'll get it," Amy called from the kitchen, where she'd been making breakfast before her morning class. Frank heard the door open, followed by a brief conversation he couldn't make out. Then Amy appeared in the living room doorway, expression puzzled. "Dad, there's someone here to see you. Says her name is Eleanor Hayes." Frank struggled to his feet, wincing at the pain in his ribs. The woman who entered was barely recognizable as the injured figure he'd carried from the burning factory. Elegant in a charcoal pantsuit, her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, she walked with a slight limp and the aid of a carbon fiber cane. The gash on her forehead had been neatly stitched, already beginning to heal. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him, her voice stronger than the pained whisper he remembered. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Frank assured her, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Amy, could you? I'll make more coffee." His daughter nodded, though she cast a curious glance at their visitor before retreating to the kitchen. Eleanor lowered herself carefully into the offered chair, arranging her cane against the armrest. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said. "The doctors tell me that if you hadn't found me when you did, the smoke inhalation alone might have been fatal." Frank shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true," Eleanor replied, studying him with those remarkable dark eyes. "I've interviewed the other witnesses. You went back into a burning building after evacuating safely twice. That's not standard behavior. Mr. Reynolds." Something in her tone made Frank wary. "Interviewed are you with the insurance company?" Eleanor smiled slightly, reaching into her jacket to withdraw a business card. "No, I'm the safety director for the Collins Foundation." Frank accepted the card, reading the embossed text. The Collins Foundation was known for its humanitarian work, disaster relief, infrastructure projects in developing regions, emergency response training. What wasn't as widely known was their connection to military contracts and advanced engineering projects. I don't understand, Frank admitted. What does the Collins Foundation have to do with Eastwood Manufacturing? Nothing directly, Eleanor said. I was touring your facility as part of a broader safety assessment of industrial suppliers in the region. It was unofficial. Industrial espionage, Frank raised an eyebrow. Eleanor laughed, a surprisingly warm sound. Nothing so dramatic. The Foundation has concerns about safety standards at several key manufacturing sites. Recent regulatory rollbacks have allowed companies to cut corners in ways that put workers and communities at risk. Like installing a substandard boiler system and ignoring warning signs, Frank suggested. Precisely. Eleanor leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. Mr. Reynolds, I'm aware of your situation with Eastwood. They're making you a scapegoat for their negligence. Frank stiffened. How do you know about that? I have my sources, Eleanor said simply. What matters is that you were right about the boiler system. Our preliminary analysis indicates a design flaw in the pressure release valve, exactly the issue you identified before the explosion. Doesn't change the fact that they're firing me, Frank said grimly. Actually, that's why I'm here. Eleanor's expression was earnest now. The Collins Foundation needs someone with your expertise, someone who can spot problems before they become disasters, who understands both the technical aspects of industrial systems and the human factors that lead to safety failures. Frank stared at her in disbelief. You're offering me a job. Risk assessment specialist for our international projects division, Eleanor confirmed. You'd evaluate safety protocols for humanitarian infrastructure water treatment facilities, power generation, emergency shelters. The salary is double what you were making at Eastwood, with comprehensive health benefits and a generous retirement package. It sounded too good to be true. Why me? There must be hundreds of qualified engineers looking for work. Engineers design things. Mr. Reynolds, you understand how they fail? Eleanor gestured toward the kitchen, where Amy was deliberately taking her time with the coffee. And you're willing to put yourself at risk to save others? That combination is rare and exactly what we need. Frank hesitated. There's a catch, isn't there? Several, Eleanor admitted frankly. The position requires travel sometimes to regions recently affected by natural disasters or political instability. The hours can be long and the conditions challenging, and not everyone at the Foundation will welcome an outsider with your unorthodox approach. Meaning we have our share of young, technology-focused managers who may underestimate the value of hands-on experience. She smiled slightly. Sound familiar? It did uncomfortably so. I'd need time to think about it, discuss it with my daughter. Of course. Eleanor stood carefully, retrieving her cane. Take the week. We can meet again on Friday to discuss details if you're interested. She placed another card on the coffee table, this one with a handwritten number on the back. My personal line. Call anytime. As Frank showed her to the door, Eleanor paused. One more thing. Mr. Reynolds, whatever you decide about Eastwood's offer, don't sign anything until we speak again. My legal team would like to review their documents first. After she left, Amy emerged from the kitchen, coffee forgotten. Dad, who was that? What did she want? Frank explained the unexpected job offer, watching his daughter's expression shift from skepticism to cautious excitement. It sounds amazing, Amy said when he finished. But international travel disaster zones. Dad, you're 58, and what about your ribs? Thanks for the reminder, Frank said dryly. And the ribs will heal. You know what I mean? Amy's concern was palpable. After what happened with Mom, and now this explosion, I worry about you. Frank understood. After losing Linda, they'd clung to each other, building a new routine out of the shattered pieces of their family. Any change to that carefully constructed normalcy felt threatening. I haven't decided anything yet, he assured her. And I wouldn't take it if you weren't okay with it. Amy's expression softened. I want you to be happy, Dad. Not just existing. If this is something you want to try, I'll support you. Frank thought about Eastwood's severance offer waiting for his signature, about the mounting bills and dwindling savings, about the years stretching ahead until retirement. Then he thought about Eleanor Hayes and her remarkable offer, a chance to use his skills to help people rather than just machinery. Let's wait and see, he said finally. We've got until Friday to decide. But the universe had other plans. Tuesday morning brought a registered letter from Eastwood Manufacturing, formally terminating Frank's employment for willful disregard of safety protocols, leading to property damage and personnel injuries. The severance offer was rescinded, replaced with a notice that his actions were under review for possible legal action. More devastating was the second letter notification that his health insurance coverage would end in 15 days. Frank stared at the documents spread across the kitchen table, a cold knot forming in his stomach. Amy had a minor congenital heart condition that required regular medication and monitoring. Without insurance coverage, her prescriptions alone would cost over $600 monthly. His phone rang Eleanor Hayes' number on the caller ID. They've rescinded the offer, she said without preamble when he answered. My source at Eastwood just confirmed it. How did you know? Frank asked, surprised. Because I've been investigating them for 6 months, Eleanor replied. This fits their pattern intimidation to prevent legal action by former employees. Mr. Reynolds. Frank, my offer still stands, but we need to move quickly. Can you meet me today? Frank looked at the termination letter, then at the photograph of Linda on the wall, her eyes seeming to challenge him as they always had when he faced a difficult decision. Where and when, he asked. The Collins Foundation Regional Office in Cambridge. 2 p.m. Eleanor paused. And Frank, bring your daughter. There's something she should see as well. As Frank hung up, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the strange combination of fear and anticipation that comes with stepping into the unknown. At 58, he'd assumed his life's path was set. Now, watching it veer in an unexpected direction. He wondered what Linda would say if she could see him now. Probably the same thing she told him when he hesitated to accept the job at Eastwood all those years ago. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. The Collins Foundation's regional office occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass tower in Cambridge's technology corridor. Frank felt distinctly out of place in his best non-funeral suit, now slightly too large after Linda's illness had caused him to lose weight he never regained. Beside him, Amy looked professional but nervous in the blazer and slacks she used for class presentations. The reception area screamed money and influence, all polished surfaces and understated elegance, with a subtle military precision to the layout that Frank recognized from his Navy days. The receptionist directed them to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. Eleanor was waiting, accompanied by a younger man in a meticulously tailored suit who she introduced as David Chen, the Foundation's legal counsel. For the next hour, they outlined the details of the position being offered: salary, benefits, responsibilities, training requirements. The health coverage is comprehensive, David emphasized on sliding a document across the table. It would cover both of you, with no exclusions for pre-existing conditions. Frank caught Amy's relieved expression at this news. Her medication and cardiology appointments had been a constant financial stress since Linda's insurance had ended. What about my father's injury? Amy asked. The cracked ribs from the explosion. Fully covered, Eleanor assured her. In fact, we'd like him to see our medical team as soon as possible. The Foundation maintains a state-of-the-art facility for our field operatives. Field operatives, Amy repeated, concern creeping back into her voice. That makes it sound like he'd be in danger? Eleanor's expression turned serious. I won't sugarcoat this. Some of our projects operate in challenging environments, areas recovering from natural disasters, or regions with limited infrastructure. There are inherent risks, but safety is our absolute priority. Which brings us to your first assignment, David continued, pulling up a presentation on the conference room's display. A flood control system in Louisiana that's showing concerning structural anomalies. The screen filled with images of a massive levee system protecting a small city from an adjacent river. Detailed engineering diagrams scrolled past, followed by inspection reports highlighting areas of concern. The system was renovated 3 years ago following Hurricane Eliza, Eleanor explained, but recent monitoring shows unexpected stress patterns in several key sections. With hurricane season approaching, we need an experienced assessment immediately. Frank studied the diagrams with growing interest. The design was impressive, but he could already spot potential failure points in the reinforcement structure. This connection point, he said, pointing to a junction where the new construction met the original levee. The materials don't look compatible for long-term water exposure, and this drainage system it's undersized for the catchment area. Eleanor smiled slightly. Exactly the issues our preliminary analysis flagged. You have a good eye. Frank, I've seen similar designs fail, he explained. During my Navy days, we dealt with port facilities that used comparable structures. He glanced at Amy, who was examining the technical specifications with the focused expression she wore when solving complex problems. When would you need me to start? As soon as you're medically cleared, Eleanor replied. Ideally within the next 2 weeks. The hurricane forecast shows increased activity by early next month. And what about Eastwood? Frank asked. Their termination letter mentioned potential legal action. David's expression hardened. Let me worry about Eastwood. We have more than enough evidence of their negligence to counter any claims against you. By the time they left the foundation's offices 3 hours later, Frank had a preliminary employment agreement, a medical appointment scheduled for Thursday, and a strange sense of disorientation, as if his life had suddenly switched tracks when he wasn't looking. What do you think? He asked Amy as they walked to her car. She was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts as she always did before important statements. I think it's an amazing opportunity, she said finally. The work sounds meaningful. The compensation is better than I expected, and the health coverage alone would be worth it. But, Frank prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice. But I'm scared, she admitted, stopping to face him. Dad, you almost died in that explosion. The idea of you working in disaster zones. What if something happens to you, too? The fear in her eyes brought Frank back to the hospital room 5 years ago, when he'd had to tell 14-year-old Amy that her mother wasn't coming home. They'd already lost so much. Nothing's going to happen to me, he promised, knowing it wasn't entirely his to promise. This isn't like the factory. The whole point is to prevent disasters, not respond to them. People in disaster zones have guns sometimes, Amy pointed out, and diseases and unstable buildings. Frank smiled slightly. I survived 32 years at Eastwood without losing any limbs. I think I can handle a few fieldwork assignments. Amy didn't return his smile. Mom thought she had years left too. The comparison struck home. Linda had been so certain she'd beat the cancer her doctors, optimistic about her chances, with aggressive treatment. They'd planned a celebratory trip to the Grand Canyon for after her final round of chemo. The airline vouchers had still been on her bedside table when she died. This is different, Frank said gently. But I understand why you're worried. If you really don't want me to take this job, I won't. Amy shook her head, blinking back tears. That's not fair. You need this job, we need this job. And it's not just about the money. You were excited looking at those diagrams. Dad, I haven't seen you that engaged since before Mom got sick. It was true, though Frank hadn't realized it until she pointed out. The technical challenge, the sense of purpose, the feeling that his experience might actually save lives rather than just keeping machines running, it had awakened something he thought had died with Linda. Let's sleep on it, he suggested. We don't have to decide right away. But as they drove home in thoughtful silence, Frank knew he had already decided. The only question was how to help Amy accept the risks that came with his choice. The widowers' support group met in the basement of St. Mark's Episcopal Church. a circle of folding chairs occupied by men ranging from their 30s to their 80s. Frank had been attending for 4 years, watching the group's composition change as new members arrived and others moved on, either finding new partners or, in a few sad cases, dying themselves. "Hell of a week you've had, Frank," said George Daniels, a 72-year-old retired history teacher who had lost his wife to Alzheimer's 7 years earlier. "Explosions, job offers, international intrigue. Makes my garden pest problems seem pretty tame." Frank smiled, accepting the styrofoam cup of terrible church coffee that was part of their ritual. "I wouldn't call it intrigue, George." "Sounds like it to me," put in Michael Abernathy, a 43-year-old single father whose wife had died in childbirth. "Secret evaluations of manufacturing plants' job offers from mysterious foundations, pure John le Carré." The group had become a place where Frank could speak freely, sharing concerns he sheltered Amy from. Today, he explained the Collins Foundation's offer and Amy's fears about the risks involved. "She's afraid of losing you," Thomas Wu observed quietly. At 35, he was the youngest member, his wife taken by a drunk driver just 6 months earlier. "After losing her mother, that fear is completely rational." "Completely," agreed Reverend Jenkins, who facilitated the group despite not being a widower himself. "The question is whether that fear should determine your decision." Frank stared into his coffee. "I don't want to cause her more pain." "Sometimes we have to risk pain to actually live again," said Harold Finch, an 83-year-old who had found a second love 20 years after his wife's death, only to lose her as well. "When Caroline died, I thought that was it for me. 15 years I spent just existing. Then I met Elaine at a dance class my daughter forced me to attend." He smiled at the memory. 7 wonderful years we had together before her heart gave out. Was it worth the pain of losing her too? Absolutely. Every damn minute. "This isn't about romance," Frank pointed out. "It's about living versus existing," Harold countered. "There's a spark in your voice when you talk about this job that wasn't there before. Amy hears it too, that's why she's conflicted. She wants you to have that spark back, but she's terrified of the cost." The conversation continued, each man offering perspective from his own journey through grief and recovery. As they were wrapping up, George pulled Frank aside. "Linda would want you to take this job," he said with the directness of long friendship. "She always said you were wasted at that factory." Frank smiled faintly. "She did say that, didn't she?" "Repeatedly and colorfully," George confirmed. "Remember that barbecue at our place the 4th of July before she got sick? She cornered poor Diane for an hour, talking about how you could have been designing systems instead of just maintaining them if you hadn't been so focused on stability for her and Amy." The memory surfaced clearly, Linda animated after 2 glasses of wine, gesturing emphatically while George's late wife nodded sympathetically. Frank had overheard only part of the conversation, but remembered feeling both touched and embarrassed by his wife's fierce belief in his untapped potential. "She'd kick your ass if she knew you were hesitating because of what happened to her," George added gently. "That woman never wanted to be anyone's excuse for playing it safe." Frank nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Thanks, George." That evening, Frank found Amy in the garage, tinkering with an old pump motor for her water filtration project. She'd converted half the space into a workshop years ago, her tools organized with a precision that always reminded Frank of Linda's approach to her garden, everything in its place, ready for use. "How was the meeting?" she asked without looking up from the disassembled motor. "Good," Frank replied, pulling up a stool. "Helpful." He watched her work for a moment, hands moving with confident efficiency despite her youth. "I've made a decision about the job." Now she did look up, expression guarded. "And I want to take it," Frank said simply. "But I need to know that you're really okay with it, not just saying you're to make me feel better." Amy set down her wrench, wiping her hands on a shop rag. "I've been thinking about it all day. Actually, I called Eleanor Hayes with some questions while you were at your meeting. This surprised Frank. What kind of questions? Technical ones, mostly about the safety protocols for field assignments, emergency evacuation procedures, medical support in remote locations. Amy's expression was serious. I wanted to know exactly what I was agreeing to. And, and she answered everything honestly, even the stuff that wasn't reassuring. Amy took a deep breath. I'm still scared, Dad, but I'm always going to be scared of losing you. That can't be the thing that stops us from living. Frank recognized Linda's phrasing in her words. Have you been talking to George? No. Amy smiled slightly. To Mom? Actually, or the version of her in my head. She'd tell me to stop being selfish and let you do something that matters. The lump in Frank's throat made it hard to speak. You're the most unselfish person I know. Amy, and this job, it won't change anything between us. It will, Amy contradicted gently. But maybe it should. We've been stuck. Dad, both of us. Since Mom died, we've been in survival mode, just getting through each day, each bill, each anniversary. Maybe it's time to try living again instead. Frank thought of Harold Finch's similar words at the support group. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers, Amy replied, her smile bittersweet. So, you'll call Eleanor tomorrow. Frank nodded. First thing in the morning. 2 weeks later, Frank stood on the tarmac of a small regional airport in southern Louisiana. The humid air so thick it felt like breathing through wet cotton. Behind him, a Collins Foundation jet was being refueled for its return trip to Massachusetts. Ahead, a rugged SUV waited to take him to his first assignment. Eleanor Hayes leaned on her cane beside him, seemingly unaffected by the oppressive heat despite her formal attire. The local team is expecting you, she said, handing him a tablet. Paul Martinez will be your guide, former Army Corps of Engineers. Knows these levees better than anyone. He'll introduce you to the municipal authorities and the construction crew. Frank nodded, still adjusting to the weight of his new credentials and the high-tech equipment in his field kit. The medical team had cleared him for limited duty, his ribs healing well enough for office work and supervised site visits, though no heavy lifting or heroics, as the doctor had put it. What about this project manager I'll be working with? Frank asked, recalling the briefing. Benjamin Weber. Eleanor's expression tightened slightly. Highly qualified on paper, masters from MIT, 5 years with top engineering firms before joining the foundation. But, Frank prompted, let's just say he represents a certain mindset within the organization. Eleanor replied diplomatically. One that values theoretical knowledge over practical experience. He may not immediately appreciate your perspective. Frank understood the warning. You mean he'll see me as an outdated dinosaur who doesn't understand modern engineering principles? Eleanor smiled. I wouldn't have put it quite so bluntly, but yes, Weber's team uses advanced computational modeling and AI-driven risk assessment. They tend to trust the algorithms more than human observation. Algorithms don't feel the vibration of a failing bearing or hear the whisper of a pressure leak, Frank noted. Precisely why we hired you? Eleanor agreed. She checked her watch. I need to get back to headquarters. Call me directly if you encounter any significant issues. And Frank, remember you're there to assess and advise, not to single-handedly solve the problem. As the jet departed, Frank approached the waiting SUV, where a weathered-looking man in his mid-60s leaned against the hood. Despite the heat, Paul Martinez looked perfectly comfortable in worn jeans and a faded work shirt, his silver hair contrasting with skin darkened by decades in the sun. You must be the new guy. Paul greeted him, extending a calloused hand. Welcome to St. Catalina Parish, where the mosquitoes are big enough to carry off small children and the humidity makes Boston summers feel like the Sahara. Frank liked him immediately. Frank Reynolds. Thanks for meeting me. No problem. Figured you'd appreciate a friendly face before diving into the snake pit. Paul opened the passenger door for him. Weber's called an emergency meeting at the project office. Seems there was another sensor alert last night after that thunderstorm. As they drove through the small city, Paul provided a running commentary on the levee system's history, built originally in the 1950s, expanded in the 70s, partially rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina, and most recently upgraded after Hurricane Eliza 3 years ago. The problem, Paul explained, is that each generation of engineers thought they knew better than the last. Instead of working with the original design principles, they kept trying to impose new theories on old foundations. Now we've got a hodgepodge of materials and techniques that don't play well together. Frank nodded, recognizing the issue from countless factory upgrades at Eastwood. Let me guess the newest sections are showing the most stress. Got it in one? Paul confirmed. Specifically, where the new concrete flood walls meet the older earthen levees. But Weber's team keeps insisting their design is sound and the sensors must be miscalibrated. The project office was a collection of modular buildings set up near the main pumping station that protected the city's lowest-lying neighborhoods. As they entered the central conference room, Frank immediately felt the tension in the air. Benjamin Weber dominated the space, tall, fit, and radiating the confidence of youth and education. Around the table sat various team members and local officials, many looking frustrated or weary, suggesting the meeting had been going for some time. "Ah, Mr. Martinez," Weber acknowledged their entrance without warmth. "And you must be Reynolds, the safety consultant from headquarters." His emphasis on safety consultant made it clear he considered the title several steps below his own position. "That's right," Frank replied evenly, taking an empty seat. "I understand there was an incident last night." Weber gestured to a large display showing stress measurements across the levee system. "A minor fluctuation in the sensor readings following yesterday's storm, well within operational parameters, despite some concerns from the local authorities." A middle-aged woman in a city official's uniform frowned. "A 2-foot drop in the foundation in Section 14 is not a minor fluctuation. Mr. Weber, that's nearly double the settlement we saw after Hurricane Eliza." "Temporary hydraulic displacement," Weber dismissed. "The new drainage system is already compensating." "If you look at this morning's readings—" "May I?" Frank interrupted, approaching the display. Years of reading maintenance data let him quickly interpret the patterns in the measurements. What he saw concerned him deeply. "This isn't just settlement," he said, pointing to the affected area. "There's a lateral shift in the foundation. See how the pressure is redistributing, classic signs of undermining?" Weber's expression hardened. "With all due respect, Mr. Reynolds, our computer models account for dozens of variables that aren't immediately apparent in the raw data. The system is performing exactly as designed during high-water events." "Computers model what we tell them to model," Frank countered. "They don't feel the ground or hear the water. When was the last time someone physically inspected Section 14? "Yesterday morning, before the storm," a younger engineer volunteered, earning a sharp look from Weber. "And after the storm," Frank pressed. Uncomfortable silence answered his question. "I think we should take a look," Frank suggested. "Right now, before the next weather system moves in." He turned to Paul. "Martinez, you know the access points." "Like the back of my hand," Paul confirmed. "Already standing." Weber looked like he wanted to object but was constrained by the presence of the local officials. "Fine, we'll conduct a visual inspection, but I assure you, the system is functioning as designed." 20 minutes later, Frank stood on the levee at Section 14, watching water seep through what should have been impermeable concrete. The recent storm had raised the river level significantly, putting pressure on the flood control system. "This shouldn't be happening," Weber muttered, staring at the wet patches appearing on the dry side of the levee wall. "No, it shouldn't," Frank agreed, kneeling to examine the joint where new construction met the older earthen levee. "The materials are incompatible. This polymer sealant breaks down under UV exposure, and the foundation wasn't properly prepared before pouring the new concrete." He pressed his hand against the wall, feeling the subtle vibration that no sensor had been placed to detect. There's water flowing underneath. The whole section is being undermined. Paul nodded grimly. Just like the Ninth Ward in Katrina. Water finds the weakness, then exploits it until the whole thing fails. The city official Frank had learned her name was Director Rodriguez looked alarmed. How bad is it? Do we need to evacuate? Frank considered carefully. Not immediately, but if another major storm hits before this is fixed, you could have a catastrophic failure. That's completely speculative, Weber objected. Our models show this section would withstand even a Category 3 hurricane. Your models didn't show this happening either, Frank pointed out, gesturing to the seeping water. Yet here we are. The tension between them was interrupted by Paul's phone ringing. His expression darkened as he listened to the caller. We've got a bigger problem, he announced after hanging up. The National Weather Service just upgraded Tropical Storm Darius to hurricane status. Expected landfall in 72 hours, potentially right over St. Catalina Parish. Director Rodriguez paled. Projected strength. Category 2 possibly strengthening to 3 before landfall. All eyes turned to the compromised levee section, water continuing to seep through in silent warning of the disaster to come. We need to evacuate low-lying areas immediately, Frank stated, and get emergency reinforcement teams working around the clock. Hold on, Weber protested. That's premature. We can monitor the situation, and monitoring won't stop this wall from failing. Frank cut him off. Director Rodriguez, how many people live in the floodplain behind this section? About 3,000, she replied without hesitation. Mostly lower-income neighborhoods, including a retirement community and a public housing complex. Frank's mind flashed back to the factory explosion, to the warning signs ignored until it was too late. Start the evacuation now. Give people time to secure their homes and leave in an orderly fashion. If I'm wrong, they can come back in a few days. If Weber's wrong, they could die. The starkness of his statement silenced further objections. Director Rodriguez nodded once, already reaching for her radio to initiate emergency protocols. As they returned to the project office to coordinate the response, Frank felt Weber's resentful gaze. The younger man pulled him aside once they arrived. You've overstepped your authority, Weber hissed. You were sent to assess, not to make operational decisions. I made a recommendation based on what I observed, Frank replied calmly. Director Rodriguez made the decision. After you deliberately frightened her with worst-case scenarios, Weber's face flushed with anger. Do you have any idea what an unnecessary evacuation costs? The panic it creates, the damage to the foundation's reputation, if nothing happens? Frank met his gaze steadily. Do you have any idea what 3,000 dead bodies looks like? Because I do. I served on a disaster recovery team after Katrina. I helped pull families from flooded homes, people who might have survived if someone had taken the warning signs seriously. Weber had no response to that. With a final glare, he stalked off to confer with his engineering team, leaving Frank to wonder if he had indeed overreached on his very first assignment. His phone buzzed a text from Amy. How's the first day going? Feeling okay. Frank stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Finally, he typed, interesting, made my first professional enemy. Ribs are fine. How's class? Her reply came quickly. Quantum mechanics is trying to kill me, but I persist. Dad, be careful down there. Weather report shows a hurricane heading your way. Frank smiled despite the situation. His daughter never missed a detail. Already on it. May have to stay longer than planned. Don't worry. I always worry, came the response. It's genetic. Love you. Love you too, he typed back, then pocketed his phone as Paul approached with maps of the evacuation zones. Weber's throwing a fit with the higher-ups, Paul informed him quietly, but Rodriguez is proceeding with the evacuation. Frank nodded, unsurprised. What do you think? Am I overreacting? Paul considered the question seriously. I've lived here my whole life. Watched these levees hold and fail through dozens of hurricanes. The signs you pointed out, I've seen them before. Right before sections gave way during Katrina and Eliza. He unrolled a detailed map of the levee system. Problem is, Section 14 isn't the only vulnerable spot. If we're looking at a direct hit from Darius, we need to inspect the entire western perimeter before the storm surge hits. Frank studied the map, noting the areas where different construction eras intersected. We'll need teams checking every joint between new and old construction, and we need to start emergency reinforcement immediately, not wait for Weber's models to catch up with reality. That'll require authorization from the foundation, Paul pointed out. Heavy equipment, materials, personnel. Weber controls those resources. Frank thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone again. Then we'd better get that authorization. He dialed Eleanor Hayes's direct number, preparing for what would likely be a difficult conversation. As the call connected, Frank glanced out the window at the darkening sky, where the first outer bands of Hurricane Darius were already visible on the horizon. The real storm, he suspected, was just beginning. Eleanor Hayes's voice was crisp through the speakerphone. "You're certain about this assessment, Frank?" "Absolutely," he replied, surrounded by Paul Martinez and Director Rodriguez in the Emergency Operations Center. "Section 14 is actively failing. We have visible seepage through what should be impermeable concrete, and the foundation is showing signs of undermining. If Hurricane Darius hits as predicted, that entire section could collapse." There was a brief silence as Eleanor processed this information. In the background, Frank could hear the hum of the foundation's headquarters. "Weber disagrees," she said finally. "He sent me the latest modeling data showing the system should withstand the projected storm surge." "Models are only as good as their assumptions," Frank countered. "They don't account for the material degradation I'm seeing on the ground. Weber's team hasn't physically inspected the compromised sections since before the last storm." Paul Eleanor addressed the former Army Corps engineer. "What's your assessment?" Paul leaned toward the speakerphone. "Reynolds is right. I've been warning about incompatible materials at the junction points for months. The polymer sealant is breaking down faster than projected, especially in sections with direct sun exposure." Another pause. Frank could almost see Eleanor weighing the political consequences against the potential disaster. "Director Rodriguez," she said finally, "what actions have you taken so far?" "Mandatory evacuation of zones A and B, the lowest lying areas most at risk if Section 14 fails?" Rodriguez replied, "Approximately 3,000 residents. We're preparing additional evacuation orders for zones C and D, pending further assessment. And the governor has been notified. State emergency resources are on standby, but they're also preparing for impacts along the entire Gulf Coast." Eleanor's decision came swiftly. "Frank, you have provisional authority to implement emergency reinforcement measures. Paul will coordinate with local contractors. I'll redirect foundation resources from our Mississippi project. Weber remains technical lead on long-term solutions, but your safety assessments take priority during this emergency." Frank felt relief wash through him. "Thank you, Eleanor." "Don't thank me yet," she cautioned. "If that levee holds without intervention, Weber's complaints about unnecessary expenditures and panic will gain traction with the board. Your position could become complicated." "And if it fails without intervention," Frank asked quietly, "then we'll have failed our mission," Eleanor replied, her tone somber. "Keep me updated every 6 hours. I'm flying down tomorrow morning." As the call ended, Director Rodriguez was already coordinating with emergency services. Paul spread detailed blueprints across the conference table, highlighting critical vulnerabilities. "Even with foundation resources, we can't fix everything before Darius hits," he warned. "We need to prioritize." Frank studied the plans, mentally calculating time versus impact. Section 14. First, it's already compromised. Then these connection points along the western perimeter where the storm surge will hit directly. Paul nodded. "I'll call Ramirez Construction. They did the emergency repairs after Eliza good work. Fair price, and they can mobilize quickly." "What about materials?" Frank asked. "That's where we might have a problem," Paul admitted. The specialized water barrier concrete we need is typically special order. We're talking weeks, not days. Director Rodriguez rejoined them, overhearing the last exchange. What about the stockpile for the port expansion project? They've got tons of marine-grade materials sitting at the North Warehouse. Paul brightened. That could work. Miguel Ramirez is friends with the port director. Make the call, Frank decided. I'll take responsibility with the foundation if there are procurement issues. As Paul stepped away to coordinate resources, Weber entered the operations center, his expression thunderous. Reynolds, a word. Frank followed him to a corner of the room, bracing for confrontation. Hayes just informed me that you've been given operational authority, Weber stated, not bothering to hide his anger. Do you have any idea how inappropriate this is? You've been with the foundation for 2 weeks. I've managed this project for 3 years. This isn't about experience with the foundation, Frank replied evenly. It's about recognizing the signs of imminent structural failure, something your sensors and models missed. Weber's jaw tightened. My team built this system. We know its capabilities better than some factory maintenance man playing engineer. The dismissal stung, but Frank kept his composure. I'm not playing anything, Weber. I'm doing the job I was hired to do, identifying safety risks before they become disasters. By undermining my authority and creating panic, Weber countered. Director Rodriguez is evacuating neighborhoods based on your amateur assessment rather than our advanced predictive models. Frank stepped closer, lowering his voice. Those advanced predictive models didn't show water seeping through impermeable concrete. I saw it with my own eyes. So did you. Minor seepage from an extraordinary rain event, Weber dismissed. Already subsiding according to this morning's readings. Then you won't mind if we take precautions, Frank said. If I'm wrong, people go home in a few days. If you're wrong, people die. Weber's expression hardened. This isn't over. Reynolds, when Darius passes and that levee stands undamaged, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly how much unnecessary panic and expense you caused. As Weber stormed off, Paul returned, eyebrows raised. Making friends. I see. Frank sighed. Just doing my job. Well, your job just got more complicated, Paul informed him. Miguel Ramirez can get us the materials and equipment we need. But there's a problem. The only access road to Section 14 is already flooding from the storm surge. We'll need to bring in the reinforcement materials by boat. Can we do that safely before the hurricane hits? Paul checked his watch. If we start now, maybe, but it's going to be tight. Frank made a quick decision. Let's move. I want to see the situation myself. The small workboat pitched violently as they navigated the swollen canal running parallel to Section 14 of the levee. Rain lashed sideways, driven by strengthening winds as Hurricane Darius approached. Frank gripped the railing, his cracked ribs protesting every jarring impact against the choppy water. Miguel Ramirez, a stocky man in his 40s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors, pointed toward the troubled section of levee. Even through the rain, Frank could see the problem had worsened. Water now streamed through multiple points in the concrete wall. That don't look good, amigo, Miguel shouted over the storm noise. Even if we can get the materials here, stabilizing that section in these conditions? He didn't need to finish the thought. The emergency reinforcement plan had been challenging under ideal conditions. With the rapidly deteriorating weather, it was approaching impossible. We have to try, Frank insisted. If that section fails during the storm surge, half the city floods. Miguel nodded grimly. My crew's standing by with the first barges of materials, but we need to establish a staging area. Frank scanned the shoreline, looking for a viable location. There, he pointed to a maintenance platform built into the levee about 100 yards from the worst section. Can we secure the barges there? It's our best option, Miguel agreed, already steering the boat toward the platform. As they approached, Frank's phone vibrated with an incoming call. Eleanor Hayes. Frank, where are you? Her voice competed with the storm noise. On site at Section 14, he replied, ducking into the boat's small cabin for minimal shelter. Situation's worse than we thought. Water penetration has increased substantially. The National Weather Service just upgraded Darius to Category 3, Eleanor informed him. Expected landfall in 36 hours, possibly sooner. I'm 10 minutes from landing at the regional airport. We're setting up emergency reinforcement operations now, Frank said. But honestly, Eleanor, I'm not sure we can stabilize this section before the storm hits. What about the evacuation? Zones A and B are nearly clear. Rodriguez is expanding to C and D now. And Weber, Frank hesitated, still insisting his models show the system will hold. He's making formal complaints about unnecessary panic and resource diversion. Let me handle Weber, Eleanor said firmly. You focus on saving lives. I'll meet you at the operations center in 1 hour. As Frank ended the call, Miguel brought the boat alongside the maintenance platform. The crew worked quickly to secure their vessel and prepare for the incoming barges of reinforcement materials. Paul Martinez joined them, rain plastering his silver hair to his head. First barge is 10 minutes out. We've got water barrier concrete, steel reinforcement mesh, and industrial pumps. Corps of Engineers is sending a team to help with emergency placement. Frank nodded, surveying the failing levee section. Years of diagnosing machine failures had taught him to see patterns and stress points. The concrete wall was visibly bulging now, water pressure building behind it as the storm pushed river levels higher. We need to create a secondary barrier, he decided. We won't have time to fix the existing wall properly before Darius hits. Best option is to build a reinforced berm on this side, essentially a second levee, to catch the water if this section fails. Paul considered this, mentally calculating materials and time. It could work. Not as good as fixing the primary wall, but better than nothing. Exactly, Frank agreed. Better than nothing is all we've got time for. As they began marking out the secondary barrier placement, Frank's ribs ached with each movement. The doctor's warning about no heroics echoed in his mind, but he pushed the discomfort aside. There were 3,000 lives at stake in the neighborhoods behind this wall. The first barge arrived, crew members struggling against strengthening winds to secure it to the platform. Frank helped direct the placement of materials, his experience with industrial equipment proving valuable despite the different context. Hours blurred together as they worked. The rain never ceased, driven horizontally by winds now approaching tropical storm force. Communication became difficult over the howling gale, forcing them to rely on hand signals and shouted fragments of instructions. Frank's phone buzzed again, a text from Amy. Dad, Darius upgraded to Cat 3. CNN shows evacuation in your area. Are you safe? He couldn't lie to her, but he didn't want her to worry either. Working on emergency reinforcement, in safe location. Will call when I can. Her response was immediate. That's not an answer. Are you on the levee? Before he could reply, Miguel shouted a warning. Frank looked up to see one of the barges breaking loose from its moorings, the storm surge lifting it and smashing it against the platform where they worked. The impact sent everyone scrambling for balance. Frank lunged to secure a stack of reinforcement materials that threatened to slide into the water. Pain lanced through his side as his cracked ribs protested the sudden movement. We need to revise the plan, Paul shouted, gesturing toward the darkening sky. Storm's accelerating. We've got maybe 6 hours before conditions make this completely impossible. Frank nodded grimly, making a difficult decision. Focus everything on a 50-foot section centered on the worst damage. We don't have time or materials for the entire area now. As they redirected their efforts, Frank's phone buzzed insistently. This time it was Eleanor Hayes. Where are you? She demanded without preamble. The operations center says you've been on site for over 5 hours. Still at Section 14, Frank confirmed. Situation's deteriorating rapidly. We're attempting a limited reinforcement of the most critical segment. The National Hurricane Center has moved up projected landfall to tomorrow morning. Eleanor informed him. Governor has declared a state emergency and ordered mandatory evacuation for the entire parish. You need to get your team to safety. Frank looked at the half-completed secondary barrier. We need another 3 hours. Without this reinforcement, That wall won't hold against the storm surge. Frank, Eleanor's voice turned serious. The Corps of Engineers team is pulling out. They say conditions have crossed the safety threshold for continued operations. As if to emphasize her point, a powerful gust rocked the platform, sending tools sliding across the wet surface. Give us 3 hours, Frank insisted. We can at least complete the core reinforcement. 2 hours, Eleanor countered. Then everyone comes in, no exceptions. That's an order. Frank, I'm not losing personnel on our first major operation. The compromise was reasonable, but Frank knew it might not be enough. As he ended the call, Miguel approached, concern evident despite the rain obscuring his features. My men are getting nervous, senor, he said frankly. The river's rising faster than predicted. Another foot and it tops the access road completely. Frank understood the implied question. 2 more hours, Miguel. Then we evacuate, I promise. Anyone who wants to leave now can go with my blessing. Miguel nodded, then surprised Frank by calling to his crew in rapid Spanish. Not a single worker abandoned their position, though fear was visible on many faces. My people built this community, Miguel explained simply. Their families live behind this wall. They worked with renewed urgency, focusing entirely on the core 50-foot section where failure seemed most imminent. The secondary barrier took shape crude but substantial, a combination of steel-reinforced concrete and packed earth designed to catch the water if the primary wall failed. 90 minutes into their final push, disaster struck. A massive section of the primary levee wall visibly shifted, concrete cracking with a sound audible even over the storm. Water began pouring through in earnest, quickly eroding the foundation beneath. Everyone off the platform, Frank shouted, recognizing imminent collapse. Move to higher ground now. The workers scrambled toward safety as the compromised levee section groaned under increasing pressure. Frank helped a younger worker who had slipped on the wet surface, pulling him toward the access ladder just as a secondary crack split the concrete with a thunderous report. Paul appeared at Frank's side, helping to evacuate the remaining personnel. We need to get clear, he urged. This whole section is going. They were among the last to reach the solid ground, retreating to higher elevation as water began overtopping the damaged wall. The secondary barrier they'd constructed was incomplete, but already serving its purpose, channeling the breach flow away from the most populated areas. Frank stood in the driving rain, watching water pour through the failed section. Call Rodriguez, he instructed Paul. Tell her Section 14 is compromised, limited breach contained by secondary barrier, but it won't hold indefinitely. As Paul made the call, Frank surveyed their emergency construction with critical eyes. The barrier might buy them hours, perhaps a day if they were lucky, but it wouldn't withstand the full hurricane storm surge. Rodriguez says they've cleared 90% of zones A through D, Paul reported, rejoining him. National Guard is assisting with mandatory evacuations of the remaining areas. And Weber? Frank couldn't help asking. Paul's expression darkened, apparently arguing with Hayes at the operations center, still insisting his design isn't at fault, blaming substandard construction practices for the failure. Frank shook his head in disbelief. Even with concrete literally crumbling before their eyes, Weber couldn't acknowledge the fundamental design flaws. It reminded him painfully of Eastwood Manufacturing's management after the boiler explosion. We've done what we can here, Frank decided. Let's get everyone to the evacuation center. As their vehicles formed a somber convoy away from the failing levee, Frank stared out the rain-streaked window at the neighborhoods. They passed homes and businesses soon to be underwater if the rest of the levee system failed as catastrophically as Section 14. His phone buzzed with another text from Amy. CNN reporting levee breach in St. Catalina Parish. Please tell me you're not there. Frank sighed, knowing she'd be watching the news coverage with growing anxiety. Was there? Now evacuated to Operations Center. I'm safe. The Operations Center was chaos when they arrived. Emergency personnel coordinating evacuations, weather specialists tracking Darius's approach, local officials fielding calls from worried citizens. In the midst of it all, Eleanor Hayes stood at the central table, directing foundation resources with calm efficiency despite her pronounced limp. She looked up as Frank entered, relief briefly crossing her features before her professional mask returned. Status report. Section 14 has failed, he confirmed grimly. Secondary barrier providing temporary containment, but water penetration is accelerating. When the storm surge hits, that entire western perimeter will likely collapse. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. The governor has mobilized additional National Guard units to assist with evacuation. FEMA resources are en route but unlikely to arrive before landfall. What about the other vulnerable sections we identified? Frank asked. Emergency reinforcement teams deployed to sections 3, 9, and 22, she replied. But they're being recalled due to deteriorating conditions. Weber's team is monitoring stress readings throughout the system. At the mention of Weber, Frank glanced around the operations center, finally spotting the project manager huddled with his engineering team around a computer station. Their expressions were grim as they studied real-time data from the levee sensors. Where do you need me? Frank asked, refocusing on Eleanor. Coordination with local emergency services? She decided. Your practical experience and ability to explain technical issues in plain language will be valuable as we implement evacuation protocols. Frank nodded, accepting the assignment. Though not as directly involved as his work on the levee, this role would allow him to help ensure residents reach safety before the worst of the storm hit. For the next several hours, he worked alongside Director Rodriguez, helping prioritize evacuation resources and identify potential shelter choke points. His experience with system failures proved unexpectedly relevant to disaster management. Both required understanding cascade effects and identifying critical intervention points. As evening approached, the operations center received alarming news Darius had strengthened again, now approaching Category 4 status, with landfall expected just after sunrise. Worse, the storm's track had shifted slightly westward, putting St. Catalina Parish directly in its path. We need to evacuate the operations center itself, Director Rodriguez announced. State Emergency Management is establishing a fallback position in Baton Rouge. Essential personnel only. Eleanor gathered the foundation team for a quick briefing. Weber, your engineering team will relocate with the core monitoring equipment. Frank, you'll join me at the fallback center to coordinate with state officials. What about Martinez? Frank asked, looking for the older engineer who had been working tirelessly since the crisis began. Here, Paul called, entering the operations center with another man tall, distinguished, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. And I've brought someone you should meet. The newcomer extended his hand to Frank. James Cooper, State Water Management Authority. Paul tells me you're the one who spotted the structural weaknesses in Section 14. Frank shook his hand. Recognizing the name from briefing documents, Cooper oversaw water infrastructure throughout Louisiana, including final approval for the levee renovation project 3 years earlier. Just did my job, Frank replied modestly. Unfortunately, we couldn't implement sufficient reinforcement before the section failed. Cooper nodded grimly. I've reviewed your preliminary assessment. Paul showed me your notes about material incompatibility at the junction points. I have concerns about how this renovation was approved with those design elements. Something in his tone caught Frank's attention. Meaning, Cooper glanced at Paul, then back to Frank. The original design specifications submitted to my office didn't include the polymer sealant that failed. They called for a more expensive but proven concrete bonding system. A substitution was made during construction. Eleanor asked, joining the conversation. Apparently, Cooper confirmed. I'd like to review the final construction records, specifically material procurement and inspection sign-offs. Weber approached, obviously having overheard. Those records are proprietary foundation documents. Any review would require board approval and appropriate non-disclosure agreements. Cooper's expression hardened. Son, there's a Category 4 hurricane about to hit a compromised flood control system, protecting thousands of lives. Proprietary concerns just took a back seat to public safety. Before Weber could respond, Eleanor intervened. The foundation will provide complete access to all project documentation. Mr. Weber, please ensure the relevant files are available at the fallback center. Weber looked like he wanted to protest but thought better of it. With a curt nod, he returned to his team's preparations for relocation. "We should move," Rodriguez urged, checking her watch. "Last convoy leaves in 30 minutes. After that, you're riding out Darius here." As they gathered their equipment, Frank received another call, this time from an unknown number. He almost ignored it until something made him answer. "Reynolds," he said curtly, expecting another emergency coordination call. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Simon Blackwood, legal counsel for Eastwood Manufacturing." The precise, cultured voice was instantly recognizable, the same attorney who had delivered Frank's termination letter. "I understand you're currently in Louisiana." Frank frowned, confused by the timing. "I'm in the middle of an emergency situation. Mr. Blackwood, whatever this is about will have to wait." "I'm afraid it can't," Blackwood replied smoothly. "I've been instructed to inform you that Eastwood Manufacturing is filing suit against you for industrial espionage and theft of proprietary information. Sheriff's deputies have a warrant to search your residence in Massachusetts." Frank felt as if he'd been punched. That's ridiculous." "Nevertheless, the company has evidence that you removed confidential documents before your termination. Ms. Eleanor Hayes and the Collins Foundation are named as co-defendants for inducing breach of contract." Frank's mind raced. He had taken nothing from Eastwood except his personal belongings. This was obviously retaliation for his new position with the foundation. "My daughter is at that house," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "If your thugs frighten her, the warrant will be executed professionally," Blackwood assured him, though the implied threat was clear. "I suggest you contact your own legal representation promptly. Good day, Mr. Reynolds." The call ended, leaving Frank staring at his phone in disbelief. Eleanor approached, concern evident in her expression. "Problem?" she asked. Frank explained the situation quickly, worry for Amy overriding everything else. Eleanor's response was immediate. "Call your daughter right now, then call this number." She handed him a business card. "Amanda Cheng, the foundation's chief counsel. She'll have someone at your house before the sheriff arrives." Frank dialed Amy with shaking hands, praying she would answer. Each ring heightened his anxiety until finally, "Dad, thank God. Are you okay? The news is showing massive flooding." "I'm fine," he assured her quickly. "Listen carefully. Amy, Eastwood is retaliating. They're sending sheriff's deputies with a search warrant for our house. Ridiculous claims about stolen documents." That's insane." Amy's voice rose in pitch. "You never brought work home." "I know. The foundation's sending a lawyer to meet you. Don't let anyone in until they arrive." Frank tried to keep his voice calm despite his racing heart. "Are you safe right now?" "I'm actually at Dr. Blue's apartment," Amy replied, surprising him. "Power went out at our place, and she invited me to stay here while working on our project. All my important stuff is with me: laptop, class materials, mom's jewelry box." Relief washed through Frank. At least she wasn't alone when the deputies arrived. "Good. Stay there for now. I'll text you the lawyer's contact information." He hesitated and then added, "I'm sorry about this. Amy, it's because of my new job." "Don't you dare apologize," Amy said fiercely. "Eastwood is trying to intimidate you because you exposed their negligence. This just proves how desperate they are." Her confidence steadied him. "I need to go, evacuation convoy leaving soon. I'll call when I can. Be safe, Dad. I mean it." Her voice softened. "Mom would be proud of what you're doing." As Frank ended the call, Eleanor waited nearby, giving him privacy while remaining supportive. "Everything okay?" "She's safe at a friend's place," Frank confirmed. "But this timing can't be coincidence. How would Eastwood even know I'm in Louisiana unless someone told them?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "An excellent question. One we'll address after ensuring you and your daughter are legally protected. Have you called Amanda yet?" Frank quickly connected with the foundation's attorney, who assured him she was already mobilizing resources in Massachusetts. By the time he finished the call, the evacuation convoy was loading, forcing him to temporarily set aside personal concerns for the larger emergency. The drive to Baton Rouge took over 3 hours in the worsening conditions, windshield wipers struggling against the increasing rainfall as Darius's outer bands lashed the evacuation route. Frank shared a vehicle with Eleanor, Paul, and Cooper, the four of them discussing levee vulnerabilities and evacuation progress to avoid dwelling on the approaching disaster. "I've been reviewing the original levee designs," Cooper said, studying documents on his tablet. "The foundation issues at the junction points were actually anticipated in the initial plans. There were specific reinforcement protocols that appear to have been modified during implementation." "Modified how?" Frank asked, professional interest overriding his personal worries. Cooper turned the tablet so Frank could see the technical drawings. "See these deep pilings at the transition points? They were designed to prevent exactly the kind of undermining we're seeing. But according to the as-built documentation, they were shortened by nearly 40%. Frank studied the diagrams, recognizing the critical flaw immediately. Without those pilings at proper depth, water pressure would create exactly the seepage channels we observed. "The question," Eleanor said quietly, "is why the design was changed after regulatory approval." The implication hung in the air. Design modifications of that magnitude required sign-off from both the project manager and local authorities. If the changes had compromised public safety for cost savings. "Weber," Frank asked, looking to Cooper. The water management official shook his head. "The modifications were approved by his predecessor, Jeffrey Hammond. Weber took over after Hammond left the foundation." "Where is Hammond now?" Eleanor asked. "Working for Barrett Construction," Paul supplied, "the primary contractor on the levee renovation." The pieces were beginning to align in a troubling pattern. Frank had seen similar situations at Eastwood Corners, cut for cost savings, documentation modified to hide deficiencies. Blame shifted to subordinates when problems emerged. "We need those procurement records," he stated. "Material substitutions, inspection reports, change orders, everything." Eleanor nodded in agreement. "I've instructed Weber to provide complete access, though given these revelations, his cooperation may be limited." The Fallback Emergency Operations Center was housed in a state government complex in Baton Rouge, a sprawling concrete building designed to withstand severe weather events. By the time they arrived, Hurricane Darius had been upgraded to Category 4 with landfall expected within hours. Weber and his engineering team had already established their monitoring station, large displays showing real-time data from the levee sensors that remained operational. Their expressions as Frank's group entered suggested the news wasn't good. "Section 14's secondary barrier is failing," Weber reported without preamble. "Water penetration has compromised sections 9 through 16. Stress indicators on the eastern perimeter are approaching critical levels." Frank studied the displays, translating the technical data into practical implications. "The entire western levee system is going to fail when the storm surge hits. How many people remain in the flood zones?" Director Rodriguez, who had arrived shortly before them, answered grimly. "Approximately 400. National Guard is conducting forced evacuations, but some residents refuse to leave. With roads now underwater in zones A and B, boat rescues are increasingly dangerous." Eleanor made a quick decision. "Weber, continue monitoring the remaining sections. Focus on identifying areas where emergency reinforcement might still save portions of the system." "Cooper, I need your authority to access state emergency resources if we identify viable intervention points." She turned to Frank. "I want you and Paul to review the complete project documentation. Find out exactly what changes were made to the original design and who authorized them. We need to understand the full scope of the problem." As they moved to their assigned tasks, Frank received another call from the foundation's attorney. He stepped away to take it privately. "Mr. Reynolds," Amanda Cheng began without preamble, "I have representatives at your home now. The sheriff's deputies arrived with a search warrant, but our team was able to narrow the scope significantly through a quick judicial review. Have they found anything? Frank asked, already knowing the answer. Nothing to support Eastwood's claims, she confirmed. However, they did find something interesting. Someone accessed your home office approximately 3 days ago. Your daughter confirms no one should have been in the house during that time. Frank felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. A break-in. It appears so, though nothing obvious was taken. Our security consultant believes someone was searching for documents or electronic devices. Chung's voice turned contemplative. Curiously, this occurred shortly after you began your assignment in Louisiana. The implications were disturbing. They wanted to plant evidence, Frank realized. Create documentation to support their lawsuit. That would be my assessment, Chung agreed. Fortunately, they appear to have been unsuccessful. We're arranging for security monitoring of your property until you return. And my daughter has agreed to stay with her professor until the situation is resolved. She's quite resourceful. Your Amy, she provided our team with comprehensive home security footage from a system I gather she installed herself. Frank smiled despite the circumstances. Senior engineering project last semester. She was worried about me living alone. Well, that footage will be extremely helpful in countering Eastwood's claims. I'll keep you updated as the situation develops. As Frank ended the call, he found Paul waiting nearby with several boxes of documentation. Everything okay? The older engineer asked, noting Frank's expression. Complicated legal situation back home, Frank explained briefly. But under control for now. What have we got here? Paul gestured to the boxes. Complete project records for the levee renovation, design specifications, material procurement, inspection reports, change orders, everything Weber's team was required to maintain. They commandeered a small conference room, spreading the documentation across the table in chronological order. Years of reviewing maintenance logs had taught Frank to spot inconsistencies and patterns in technical documentation. He started with the original design specifications, comparing them to the as-built drawings that documented what was actually constructed. The discrepancies were subtle but significant changes that individually might seem minor, but collectively compromise the system's integrity. Pilings shortened, concrete mixtures modified, reinforcement spacing increased, sealant materials substituted. Look at these inspection reports, Paul said, pushing several documents toward Frank. The same inspector signed off on every modification. Often on the same day changes were implemented. That's not standard procedure. Frank examined the signatures. Thomas Grayson? You know him. Paul's expression darkened. Former county building inspector. Retired suddenly about 2 years ago. Bought a vacation home in Florida that a county employee shouldn't have been able to afford. The implication was clear. And the change orders, who authorized those? Paul located the relevant documentation. Primary authorization from Jeffrey Hammond as foundation project manager. Secondary signatures from... He paused, frowning. Well, that's interesting. What? Frank asked, looking up from his own review. Secondary authorization on the major change orders came from Silas Benson. The name hit Frank like a physical blow. Benson, the plant manager from Eastwood Manufacturing. Paul nodded slowly. According to this, he was representing Barrett Construction as a technical consultant during the renovation period. Special appointment to the Oversight Committee. Frank's mind raced, connecting dots that suddenly formed a disturbing picture. Benson had been at Eastwood for decades, but had taken a 6-month sabbatical 3 years ago, timing that would align perfectly with the levee renovation project. I need to call Eleanor, he said, reaching for his phone. Before he could dial, the door burst open. Weber stood there, face pale despite his evident anger. The Western levee system is failing. Multiple catastrophic breaches reported as the storm surge hits. The fallback center erupted into activity as officials coordinated emergency response. Displays showed live footage from news helicopters braving the outer bands of the hurricane water pouring through collapsed sections of the levee. Neighborhoods already beginning to flood as Darius's full fury approached. Eleanor found Frank amidst the chaos. What did you find? He quickly summarized their discoveries, the pattern of modifications, the questionable inspections, and most significantly, Benson's involvement as a technical consultant during the renovation. The same Benson who fired you for identifying safety issues at Eastwood. Eleanor clarified, her expression hardening. And now Eastwood is pursuing legal action against you while you're investigating a compromised infrastructure project he consulted on. The timing can't be coincidence. Frank agreed. They're trying to discredit me before I can connect these dots publicly. Eleanor made a swift decision. Continue your investigation. I want every document, every email, every connection between Hammond, Benson, and Barrett Construction. If there was corruption in this project, we need to expose it before they can shift blame to the foundation. As she moved away to coordinate the foundation's response to the unfolding disaster, Frank's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. Dad, are you seeing the news the levees are failing? Please tell me you're safe in Baton Rouge. He quickly responded, safe at Fallback Center, investigating possible corruption in levee construction. Sheriff find anything at our house? Her reply came moments later. Nothing, but Ms. Chung says someone broke in days ago. Also, Weird Development got a call from Harriet Jones at Eastwood, claiming she has info about the explosion that proves you were right. Wants to meet? Frank frowned at this unexpected twist. Harriet had been the supervisor who dismissed his concerns about the boiler system. Why would she reach out now? Tell Chung immediately, he typed. Don't meet Jones alone. Could be trapped to support lawsuit. Already told Chung, Amy responded. She's sending someone to attend meeting with me. Dad, be careful. I think this is bigger than just Eastwood being vindictive. Frank shared her concern. The connections between Eastwood, Barrett Construction, and the compromised levee project suggested a disturbing pattern of negligence and potential corruption spanning multiple projects. As Hurricane Darius made landfall, transforming from meteorological data to devastating reality, Frank returned to the documentation with renewed purpose. Lives had already been lost to corruption and corner cutting. He was determined to expose those responsible, not just for justice, but to prevent future disasters born of the same deadly combination of greed and negligence. The storm raged outside while Frank and Paul methodically built their case, document by document, signature by signature. A pattern of corruption taking physical form in failed concrete and broken steel, written in the rising waters now flooding a city that should have been protected. When the waters finally receded from St. Catalina Parish, they left behind more than mud and debris. They revealed the true foundation upon which lives had been built, not concrete and steel, but choices made in boardrooms years before, signatures on papers that valued profit over safety. Frank Reynolds stood on the rebuilt levee 1 year later, his weathered hand testing the integrity of new concrete that wouldn't weep false promises. Beside him, Amy adjusted calibrations on monitoring equipment she designed herself, her engineering degree now hanging beside her mother's photograph at home. The lawsuit against Eastwood Manufacturing had exposed corruption stretching across state lines, through corporate boardrooms, and into government offices. 3 men faced federal charges. Countless others had learned to fear the quiet persistence of a maintenance man who could read the language of failing systems. At 59, Frank understood something he couldn't have at 32, that integrity, like concrete, reveals its true strength only when under pressure, that second chances come in unexpected forms, that doing the right thing carries costs and rewards impossible to calculate in advance. Eleanor limped to his side, her cane tapping lightly against the solid barrier. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd walked away that night? She asked, gazing out at the community they'd helped save. Frank smiled slightly, feeling the weight of lives preserved instead of a cardboard box of belongings. Not even once.